Today is January 17th, 2025, which marks the 8-year anniversary of a seminal moment in internet history. 8 years ago today, Twitter shut down social video sharing platform Vine. 2 days from now, just in time to celebrate the anniversary, another incredibly popular short-form video platform is probably closing its doors to Americans for good. You know, unless we see some sort of 11th hour saving grace. But these are not the same thing. Their reasons for shutting down are completely different. They exist in very different moments for internet culture, and the ripple effects of Vine's shutdown soon won't even compare to what we're going to see when TikTok potentially shuts down. Let's use a boat metaphor. Everyone knew that the Vine boat had a giant crack in the hull. Most people had already deboarded before it sank. Very few people didn't survive this shipwreck. TikTok was struck by a cruise missile while everyone was on board, and is currently falling to the ocean floor, and there are not enough lifeboats. I had to sit back down to film this part because I left it out originally, and I think it's really important. This is going to be pretty bad for a lot of people. This is not only a platform where people go to doom scroll and just, numb their brain. This is a platform where some people go to put themselves out there and to make money in some cases. And listen, we are not talking about exorbitantly wealthy people, okay? I mean, in some cases we are. There are certainly wealthy TikTokers and influencers, but there are regular people, like genuine, honest, hardworking people, not famous people, people you've never heard of, that are making money they need off of TikTok. This amounts to like a digital economic crash. This is going to be pretty problematic for a lot of creators. And so if you are one of these creators, I wanted to include this part to let you know that, my heart goes out to you. I hope that you find your footing elsewhere. And I just want to make sure we don't overlook talking about how bad this is going to suck. Anyway, that's all. On to the rest. Now, I'm not smart or educated enough to go into all the specifics of why these shutdowns occurred. This video will focus a lot more heavily on the cultural ramifications. But still, I know enough to give you an overview. So I'm nearing 20 years old, which makes me one of the oldest people who doesn't remember Vine. A little bit older than me and you probably had the app on your phone. A little bit younger than me and you might have grown up without watching Vine compilations on YouTube, which means you had a terrible childhood. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, let's briefly overview the history of Vine. Vine was founded by 3 Silicon Valley tech bro type guys who managed to sell the service to Twitter for a reported $30 million. You can tell this happened in 2012 because the idea, what if we did short form video, was worth $30 million. But Twitter thought this would pair nicely with their brand of short form text content, and the app debuted on iOS and Android in 2013. In the end, the app simply wasn't profitable for Twitter, which was itself struggling at the time. The creative constraint and the introduction of other short video platforms led many creators and advertisers to pull out of Vine before it had officially closed its doors. Shortly before the shutdown, around 20 of Vine's biggest creators met with executives. The creators had a demand: $1.2 million a month for 12 videos a month for 20 people. Now listen, I believe that people should be compensated for their creative work. As a creative person, I believe this very, very strongly, and my livelihood depends on it. But we're talking about a flat rate of $100,000 for each 6-second video. While I understand that Vine's creators needed to be able to make a living for their work, $100,000. This was the death knell for Vine's profitability, obviously, as the already struggling Twitter would never agree to this, and I'm gonna side with the creators rather than the corporate overlords about 99.9% of the time. But damn, we found the 0.1%. But what about TikTok? A common misconception, or at least one that I held, was that TikTok was simply the rebranded version of Musical.ly, an absolutely horrendous app that I remember all too well from elementary school. In actuality, TikTok is the globally marketed version of Douyin, a Chinese social media platform owned by Chinese parent company ByteDance, which purchased Musical.ly for $1 billion and then merged it with TikTok. TikTok, now merged with Musical.ly, quickly became massively popular in the United States in sheer numbers and as a cultural driving force. It's honestly hard hard to think of any major, like, Gen Z cultural touchstones in the last few years that didn't have a lot to do with TikTok. But the app's Chinese ownership and sketchy data mining practices have long been the subject of conversation, even on Capitol Hill. Now, unless the Supreme Court intervenes, there is a law going into effect on Sunday that will probably lead to the app's shutdown in the United States. TikTok won't shut down entirely, but will likely be unavailable in the US. President Biden says he won't enforce this law. Trump might or might not enforce this law, but either way, the Justice Department can fine app stores and internet providers up to $5,000 per TikTok user. So, regardless of whether the president decides to enforce the law will be in effect and companies can get fined for it, which sounds an awful lot like it's getting enforced. The point is, unless the platform transfers ownership, you're unlikely to be able to access it in a couple days. And look, I might be stupid, but I'm not blind. We all know that all major social media platforms are gathering and selling our data to the highest bidder. And that's a very real problem we should all be concerned about, but it isn't unique to TikTok. The thing that pisses me off is that the combined three branches of the American government 100% wield the power to do something about data mining and propaganda across the board. But with the shady relationships that we're currently seeing form between these companies and those in political power, there's a very slim chance that we'll see this type of regulation actually occurring. At least, not anytime soon. Banning TikTok is a band-aid on a bullet hole. On to the fun part. Or, like, fun, apolitical. Anyone who's been on the internet for any period of time knows how quickly it changes. The internet in 2017 was a very different place from the internet we know now. Let's start with Vine. Vine was cursed by all the same things that made it great. The constraint of having to cram the entire thing into 6 seconds led to some incredibly quotable and creative content, but nobody wants to do that for the rest of their life as a career. Drew Gooden's Vine Where Are They Now video contains a pretty great explanation of why he thinks Vine's shutdown was inevitable. The other thing with Vine is that it had a gimmick. These videos are great because they're short and simple and usually lighthearted, but that's not addictive enough in today's climate. Look at gambling addiction. It is variable reward, the fact that sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, that makes gambling addictive. You're willing to lose if it means you get to win every once in a while. The same can be said for TikTok. I will see the funniest shit I've ever seen and then scroll down and get pissed off. All happening within the span of a couple of minutes, a couple seconds even. Vine was too fun to be truly addictive because it was just one thing. TikTok is everything. It's comedy, it's a news source, and there's no real way to filter and find what you want. You just kind of get on there and start digging. You get to be completely mindless, and the algorithm, using data that it gathers about your likes and watch time and other metrics, tells you what you want each time you get on the app. Keep in mind, this is how Reels works, this is how YouTube Shorts works, this is how Twitter and Threads works, and it's how Instagram works once you get past the posts from people you already follow. That is just how platforms work now because they've discovered it's a lot more addictive that way. Vine was a stepping stone towards these fully optimized engagement machines. It had to fail so that these could succeed. Naturally, these apps had very different cultural impacts to mirror their structural differences. Vine was one thing for the most part, so we can all agree on what some of the most famous Vines are. What comes to your mind when I say road work ahead? There's a canon of great Vines, the ones that come up again and again in these YouTube compilations. They've been immortalized even after Vine's death. These are the Vines I grew up on. It's actually incredible to me that an app I never had has made such a distinct impression on my memory and my sense of humor. TikTok, on the other hand, doesn't have a one-size-fits-all canon of great content. Please try your best to drop a classic TikTok that everyone should recognize in the comments. I really doubt that you'll be able to find something that everyone knows about the way that everyone knows about, say, road work ahead. It was far too big and far too personalized to each individual user. Your TikTok experience was much more different from mine than two Vine users' experiences would have been from each other. That makes me wonder if we'll ever see a platform with such a distinct identity as Vine. Since they all seem to be moving in the direction of hyper-individuality, I'm gonna have to guess not. And that's sad. Vine brought us together while TikTok I don't even fucking know what TikTok did. It was kind of just noise for me. I remember learning in my high school US history class that the radio and television were both inventions that pushed the United States towards a more unified cultural identity rather than regional. That makes sense. Like, how would you reach people in other regions and engage in cultural exchange fast enough for national cultural standards to form? I feel like Vine was one of those early social media platforms that did something similar. And perhaps that's just like rose-colored hindsight glasses. I haven't tried it, but I feel like I could talk to someone from any part of the country, maybe even any part of the world, and there would be a decent chance that they've seen Free Shavakadu. Modern social media does something different entirely. It doesn't aim to be entertainment, at least not only entertainment. It aims to be everything. It aims to take up as much of your time and occupy as many corners of your brain as possible. I'd even go as far as to say that because of modern social media, we don't have a unified national identity or even regional identities. I don't know about other places and other people, but I've never felt a strong, identifiable connection to the South or even my hometown. Like, I love my hometown, but it has very little to do with who I am from a sociological or cultural standpoint. We talk about book talk. You'll see comments like, how did I end up on the Pedro Pascal edit side of TikTok? I am on this side of TikTok. The reason we describe it this way, almost as if these are real geographical locations, reveals a lot about how we think about the app and about social media in general. The average person is a citizen of dozens of different communities. That's your cultural identity in the year 2025, or at least it's some sort of odd digital stand-in for a cultural identity. I could literally talk about this part for hours, so please leave me comments. I'll reply to anything that piques my interest. When Vine went down, most of its biggest creators went to YouTube. Some were never really seen again, and others were seen far too much, and still are, somehow. I don't know how we didn't leave the fucking Paul brothers in 2017. Some of my favorite YouTube creators are former Viners, so if it's any consolation, many of your favorite TikTokers will figure it out. I would recommend like maybe writing down a list of everybody that you follow that you want to continue following so you could see what they get up to next or something like that. But where will everyone go this time? A couple of previously obscure platforms have come to the forefront recently, but nothing seems very viable to me. There's Lemon8, but it's owned by the same parent company as TikTok, so it's fairly likely that won't last very long either. We've seen people trying out RedNote, another Chinese-owned platform, which has to be one of the funniest examples of situational irony I've seen in a while. I just know all of the politicians concerned about Chinese data mining are just beating their heads against the nearest wall right now. I don't think there is an answer right now for a perfectly viable TikTok alternative. Most likely these users will end up on existing established platforms. Instagram Reels is perhaps the most similar, so it's a natural contender, especially if they decide to do what YouTube recently did and extend the length of the videos that you can post. In fact, if I was Zuckerberg right now and I wanted to get my money up, I'd be doing that. But I shouldn't give him any ideas. Anyway, YouTube Shorts now allows 3-minute videos, which makes it not as bad an option as it might sound. I know YouTube Shorts gets kind of a bad rap. Even long-form YouTube, just regular old YouTube, would be pretty well suited to certain TikTok creators. It doesn't have to be like a vertical scrolling platform. And if that sounds implausible, remember, many Viners ended up on YouTube and now make hour-long bangers. If this ban doesn't end up happening in the event of a buyout or a SCOTUS ruling, I arguably wasted hours of my life writing this video, but hopefully, even in the event that that happens, I've made some points that are universally true. Arguably, all the shit I said about TikTok is even more true if, or even more relevant anyway, if TikTok remains up. So my apologies if my thoughts were a little bit disorganized. I wrote this entire thing in a few hours because I really wanted to talk about it on the anniversary of Vine's shutdown, and I'm going to edit it as soon as I'm done. So I will see you in the next video. Until then, I'm Sam Morgan, and this is Pictures Up.